someone's little thing. It's a pleasure to be here. My first time in Montreal, I think. So very nice to be here. This is a paper that's joint with Diego Daruich, and we just recently revised the paper till the end of August. We have a new version. And so this is the first time with this new version, and comments are very much welcome. So first of all, universal basic income. It's an unconditional cash transfer. People can choose how to use funds. It's universal and it's substantial. This is increasingly popular policy, even more so with the pandemic. And it's thought to help with various things. First of all, the social safety net, growing inequality, lower intergenerational mobility, and then, of course, fear of mass unemployment because of automation and robotization. So what we want to ask is, what are the consequences of UBI, which is how I will refer to universal basic income? And we have only very partial and short-term evidence from a variety of cash transfer programs, mostly in developing countries. And what we're especially ignorant of are the longer-run consequences of UBI. What we think we're doing is to use a quantitative dynamic model as an inexpensive test of what might be the consequences in the longer run of such a policy. And we're really interested in thinking about what are the channels by which UBI will affect welfare. This jumps a lot. Okay, so very quick outline. I'm going to give you, this is a macro paper for those of you who may not realize it. This is going to be a general equilibrium life cycle model with what's different from a lot of other things. It's going to have endogenous intergenerational linkages between parents and children, and I'll go into that in detail. We're going to estimate the model using US household data, mostly to the year 2000. So everything that I say is going to be in 2000 year prices. And we're going to have a progressive tax function, just like, I'm going to mispronounce your name, and Vagar did, a slightly different one, the HSV, which has deductions, credits, and cash transfers. We will validate the model, both using things that we did not match, and also using small-scale, short-run experiments that exist from the literature, in particular for labor supply and child development and labor earnings. And lastly, then we're going to turn to the main thing, which is to look at these policies. And I may not have the timing of this talk right, so I may have to speed up at some point. It's a learning process. So just to give you a brief preview of the results, we're going to be looking at $8,000, again, in $2,000 a year to all adults. And what we're going to find is that every cohort on average suffers welfare loss, in particular those people who are alive and are adults when the policy is introduced lose about 6% in consumption equivalent units. In the new steady state, there's a very large fall of 22% in consumption equivalent units, and there's a fall in inequality, which is a positive part. What we find is UBI decreases labor supply, education, skills, savings, but also inequality. Output's going to fall by a lot in the long run, about 20%. There's also going to be important falls in post-tax income inequality and increases in intergenerational mobility. When we try to analyze, and that's where we really spend the most time and effort in this paper, especially this new version, what's driving the results, we find that endogenous skills are going to account for half, more or less, of the long-run welfare losses, but basically about none of the losses for adults. When we replace the endogenous capital stock and the interest rate with exogenous ones, that's going to decrease long-run welfare losses by even more than shutting down endogenous skills transmission. And adults are going to gain from UBI, actually. And when we do a Merleesian-style decomposition to ask whether it's the size of this, in some sense, that's really mattering. $8,000 per adult is a lot per year. And we find that even small transfers are going to decrease welfare once this transfer is received by all, even in partial equilibrium, but much larger losses in general equilibrium. So let me start with the model. So
can I ask one thing? So I don't know the debate about the UV, but I think a lot of people, like more conservative people, they will say, okay, I think it can be a good policy if it gets rid of some of the distortions.
Yeah, we do that.
Other things such as UI.
We do that.
Okay.
So when I come to the implementation of the policy, I won't show it to you, but I'll say it. Okay, so one of the things that we do is to get rid of administrative costs. And then we ask how large would the administrative monitoring costs would have to be for this to be welfare improving, and it's very, very large, astronomically large. Yeah, so quick outline again for the model. There's going to be 4 stages in the model in terms of life. There's going to be people who are going to live 20 years. Each year you should think of 20 periods. Each period you should think of 4 years of life. There's uncertainty and incomplete markets. There's endogenous borrowing, labor supply, and college choices in the model. Wages depend on age, education, skills, and there's also going to be a shock. And in the background, there's an aggregate firm that takes capital, non-college labor, and college labor, combines them to produce output. What are the endogenous intergenerational links? Well, first, a parent cares about their kids' welfare. And because they care about kids' welfare, of course, they care about their grandkids and great-grandkids, etc. A parent is going to be investing in their child's skills, and they're also going to be giving a monetary transfer to their child once their child reaches adulthood. So it's an in vivo transfer that occurs once in this model. Why might you think that it'd be good for the government to intervene in such a world? Well, there's imperfect capital in insurance markets, so having more cash on hand might be a good idea. There's also the inability of parents to write contracts with kids. So kids might want their parents to invest more in their skills, and they can't promise to compensate them in their future out of their own earnings. So this might be another reason that you want to intervene. Let me just go straight here. So take an agent who's just born at J equals 1. J are these different periods, okay? Each one, again, is 4 years. They live with their parent. There's only one parent and one child here. The parent invests in skills and also is going to give them a transfer when they become independent, which here is just age 16. Yeah. Then at age 16, or J equals 5, the child decides whether or not they want to go to college or straight to work. College is costly, but it changes their wage profile, so they may want to do it. Then either if they don't go to college, then straight in period 5, or if they do go to college, then starting in period 6, they start to work. They earn wages. That depends on, as I said, all those variables. And they can also, when they have a child, and the child is born to them exogenously when they're 28 years old in terms of really calendar years, but J is equal to 8, they do direct investment in their child's skill.
Okay. Is there a reason you choose 16?
I mean, it's either 16 or 22, right? Because every period is 4 years. So that's not, 16 or 20. I'm sorry, I couldn't add. Yeah, so it's 4 years, so we're stuck with one thing, yeah.
So in the college stage, do you consider the student debt?
Yeah. I'm just giving you the timeline right now. I'm not going into any details. Yeah, so then at age 64, you retire exogenously. Then you're going to live from your retirement income, which is your savings and Social Security. And then once you have universal basic income, what would it change? Well, you can use it to help finance college. You can use it to help smooth your consumption and to invest in your child's skill. And you can use it to supplement your savings and Social Security earnings once you retire. I'm going to really not spend time on the value functions. I just want to show you a few to make sure that it's very clear what I'm doing. So you enter, this is a typical work period when you're not investing in your kids, okay? So you enter with a certain age J, you have some assets, you have some skills vectors, that's the theta. You have an education, which is either college or not college. And you have a productivity shock, which is that eta over there. And you decide how much you would like to consume, how much you'd like to save, and how much you'd like to work to maximize your utility plus continuation value. You do so understanding that you have to follow a budget constraint. The budget constraint is your labor earnings, your asset earnings, and from these you're going to be subtracting your taxes. Okay. What are these labor earnings? Well, these labor earnings is how much you're working, H. There's unit wage for efficiency units that you have, or which depends on your education. And then there is the number of efficiency units that you have, which is going to depend on your skills and also on this productivity shock. You have borrowing constraints in the background, which is that you're never allowed to go below a natural borrowing constraint, a lower bar here, which might depend on your age. Actually, I think we end up not having it depend on your age. Actually, it does, because the rest of life matters. And then what else do I want to say? I think that's about it for this. What happens when you're investing in your child's kids? Well, now you have a new state variable, which is a vector of your child's skills. And therefore, in addition to thinking about how much you'd like to consume, save, and work, you're also going to be thinking about how much you'd like to invest in your child's skills. That's this M. These are purely monetary expenditures here. And why do these matter? Well, they matter because your child's skills next period is going to be a function of their current skills, what the skills that you have as a parent, and how much you invest in your kids through this function. It's simply some A times N, okay? There's a shock, and this is a CES, okay? We're going to be taking, this happens every period that the child is living with you. It might be that in some periods, skill formation is more important than other periods. So we think that about early childhood expenditures. So we're going to be taking these parameter values directly from Cunha et al. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. You can interrupt me.
Is there a reason why you add stochastic human capital?
Sorry?
So what's this shock? What's the purpose of the shock?
Well, it's just, I mean, there is uncertainty.
You see it in the morning before you make your investment, or is it after the?
You see last periods before you make the investment. Yeah, so I think they're born, they draw a shock that depends on the parent's skills, an initial value, if you'd like. They draw an initial value that depends on the parent's skills. You make the investment. The next. So I guess depends how you want to think about it. The next morning, you wake, or the next year period, you wake up. You have to once again decide. So I guess the way that I'm saying right now, it's beginning of period shock.
Yeah. And related to that, so you assume that the investment is money, not time, right?
Just because before we used to have money and time, and it's too much. Yeah. And also these things are very noisily estimated, especially the time part. Yeah. Okay, the only other thing I want to tell you is there's going to be a moment here, which is when your child is going to decide whether to go to college or not go to college. At that point, actually, your child is going to also obtain a taste shock for going to college. You make this, just for computational reasons, you make your decision prior to your child's taste shock, and you decide how much you'd like to transfer to your child. So here you decide an A hat that you'd like to make from your own assets to your child, which means that that period in which your child is making their decisions, they're starting with an A hat in terms of assets. They're not starting with 0. And then I don't have a slide to show you, but it's just how does a child decide between going to college and not going to college? They compare their value functions from going to college versus not going to college. There's a lot that I'm not telling you. When the child is in college, they can work. They can access student loans when they right before they go to college, so that can help to pay for going to college. There's a price, PE, of going to college. When they get student loans, these are subsidized student loans, so the interest rate is calibrated to make sure that it has the right wedge there. I don't want to tell you too much about college because it just takes too much time.
So the college premium is going to be endogenous.
Yeah.
Even after that, the universal basic income experiment you're going to run, that is potentially going to change the return to college.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because it's going to change the marginal person who's going to college. Yes.
Okay, I like this thing of the transfer, but it's quite unusual, right? So
not really.
Can you say a little about why you have that?
There's transfers that go on between parents and children. A lot of time, parents pay for their kids' education when they go to college. I'm paying for my daughter. She just started. So I can tell you it's incredibly expensive. It's not that expensive in the data. So this is one way of capturing that. So we're going to make sure that we capture all transfers that occur, I think, between age 16 and 30 for the child, and that's what we're going to calibrate to. But we can't have multiple periods of transfers.
No, I think and I guess if you didn't have it, you would have a hard time getting the kids' choices right. So probably.
Not really, because then you always change the taste function so that the right number go. You don't. That's not really the reason. It's just that parents do pay for kids' expenditures in many ways, and this is one way to respect that. Yeah. Okay. For the estimation, we're going to map the model to the data, thinking that an agent in the model represents a household. So that's an important mapping. We use a variety of microdata sets, PSID, NLSY, and the Child Development Survey. I'm just going to tell you some key facts, okay? So first of all, there's going to be taxes. What do taxes do? They fund transfers and they fund retirement benefits. There's going to be things that are left over when we do this. One of the things we're calibrating to is the ratio of government expenditures to output. So those are going to be unmodeled government expenditures, but they're going to be there and they're going to remain constant when we do policy changes. So let me just bring you some of the highlights. Here is the type of labor tax we're looking at. Y are your labor earnings, T of Y is your taxes that you're paying. And the way we're modeling it is based on Feldstein, Benabou. It's been used by other people, Heathcote-Soros, and Violante, et cetera. It's become quite popular in the macro literature because it features a progressive tax instead of a linear tax. So your after labor tax income is modeled as being lambda times income to the raised to the 1 minus tau y. Omega are your lump sum transfers. And when you get UBI, that's going to be a B. It's simply a sum on this. And of course, it's going to have to be funded. We're going to end up taking tau y from the literature, and it's estimated as 0.18. The literature often does not have this omega. In fact, I think we're the first people to have this omega, and that's just going to help much fit better the transfers that are currently received from low labor income ages. Otherwise, this would tell you that if you have a labor income of 0, you get 0 transfers, and you get 0 after tax income, and that's not true. You get something. So our tax function is going to be a little bit more complicated than that. Was labor taxes. There's also going to be taxes on your earnings from your assets, so your capital income, and there's also going to be taxes on consumption. And these are going to be parameters that we're going to be taking from the literature, in particular Trabant and Ulick.
So I would expect you to include B inside lambda, so lambda plus B times that part. Is there, will it change at all, or?
I mean, it's going to be a lower thing then. I mean, it's like we're giving them less money. So they're starting with they're starting with the 8,000 and they're getting taxed on the 8,000. We're thinking about this as net of taxes. So if you'd like, yeah, you can think of it that way.
When you introduce the B, which of the taxes do you use to finance it?
I'll get to that. We're not there yet. Okay. So labor productivity, and I think Vagar. I'm very bad at names in general, by the way, and even worse at faces. Vagar talked a little bit about this, didn't you? But this is a slightly different because here, this is your units, your efficiency units, how productive you are. And we said before, it's going to depend on a shock that you're going to get, but it's also going to depend on your vector of skills. Now, we have a vector because we're getting parameters from a particular literature, and that paper by, I always forget their names, Cunha et al. And they have both cognitive and non-cognitive skills. The important thing is here, it only depends, your labor earnings are going to depend on your cognitive skills. What else? We have the superstar states that Vagar had, which is you need something like that to match the degree of wealth and income inequality that you see. So that one's fairly standard. Far less standard is this out of work shock, which showed up. It didn't show up in Vagar's paper, but it kind of did. We look at people who have no labor income for an entire period. So we're looking at the PSID, and we look at people who are out of work for whatever reason. It could be disability, it could be early retirement, and it could be that they're long-term unemployed for whatever reason. It's a very small fraction of the model, of the population. In reality, it's less than 1% once you get past the age of, say, 50. But the reason we kept it in is originally we were much more interested in thinking about the threats of automation. So we will then, I will not be able to get to it today, but we can increase this out-of-work shock exogenously to think about automation. So think about automation making some people's jobs obsolete. They can retrain, et cetera, but they're going to be out of the workforce for a certain amount of time. Okay, we estimate this by education group. Using the PSID, we estimate the superstar to match the income share of the top 5% and the wealth share of the top 1% and 0.01%. So we use simulated methods and moments to match household labor data, household level data. We target the ratio of government expenditures to output, as I said before, and the ratio of the variance of pre to post-tax total income. And that's going to give us, that's what gives us this lump sum transfer of omega, which turns out to be about $1,600 per year. The parent investment in child skills and transfers, it's data from PSID and CEX, and the parameters come directly from Cunha, Heckman, and Shana. There's a whole bunch of external parameters, borrowing limits, college loans, wedges between subsidized rates versus non-subsidized rates, intergenerational persistence of initial skills, the aggregate production function. All that is our external parameters. Internally estimated parameters have to do with matching these moments on your right-hand side. I already talked about the omega. I guess for the superstar shock, I told you what we're trying to match, and these are going to be your probability of entering the superstar state, your probability of exiting, and how productive you are when you're in your superstar state. There's going to be this rather long function of school tastes, and there we're going to be matching college shares, the relationship between going to college and the cognitive skill slope, the relationship between going to college and the non-cognitive skill slope, et cetera. So I'm not going to spend time talking about this right now. I'm more interested in telling you a little bit about validation. So validation means we're looking at non-targeted moments, for example, and some of them are going to have to do with investments in children. So in particular, how much you spend on your kids, the expenditure ratio by parental income, middle to bottom and top to bottom. So these are not calibrated within the model or estimated within the model. So they're not going to be exact matches, but they do fairly well. We can ask what's the probability of a child born in the 20%, exiting the bottom 20%. We do fairly well on that. And then a whole slew of things that have to do with college, in particular, share of college students with loans, the share of college students' loans who have a high school parent, the share of college students with loans who have a college parent, and then because inequality matters very much for welfare results, we are interested in looking at inequality in income and wealth. And
do you match intergenerational linkages and educational attainment by likelihood of the child being college educated conditional on the parent?
We match I don't know that I don't remember if we match it or we simply look at it. We look at the intergenerational persistence of education, which is basically what's the probability that you go to college, given that your parents have college versus not having college. So in that sense, yes.
You have a bequest motive that is.
There's no the bequest is the intergenerational trend. Is a transfer.
But what happens when people?
There is no bequest. There's no warm glow. There's no.
If I don't have children, would I?
No, everybody. No. There's not that. There's a lot of heterogeneity in the model, but it's not from there. So everybody has. This is macro. Yeah,
Macro, there are people without children.
No. No. I mean, you can do that. You can do that, but it's yeah.
And the percentage of the population without children?
In the U.S., I don't know. Obviously, they're not going to matter for anything that's intergenerational.
Yes, but for the universal.
Yeah, but we're particularly interested in the long run effects, and so they die without kids. Bye-bye, yeah, so, yeah. But I mean, you can certainly put it in if you're interested in any moment, because there's any moment in time, there's going to be people who don't just decide not to have kids. They just won't have any intergenerational linkages. Okay, so the data is the blue, the model is the red. This is the labor income by quintile. I'm not sure how well you see. I certainly didn't see well when I was there. So I'm a bit worried. We do a fairly good job. This is something that was not matched. This is wealth. We do a bit less of a good job there. But the important, I think, if you're thinking about inequality, one of the things you're really going to care about is matching the bottom. And as you can see, we do pretty well in getting the fact that the first two quintiles basically have no wealth in the data. We do a pretty good job of matching that. What else? Well, we do certain experiments. So let me just make sure. Yeah.
And the number of children matters, or only one children by
It's one child. It's one child, but again, this is calibrated to your average household. So for the data, like when there's two parents, and they're both working, what income do we give that parent? Given that our model has only one parent, we divide by 2. So it's not like we're giving one parent all the income of 2 parents. So everything is kind of respects that.
Yes, but this can affect the monetary investment in.
Absolutely. But again, you're only seeing it per parent here. So if you'd like to think that each parent has a child, then it would be less of an issue. Okay. All right. We're going to match certain things. We're going to be running certain experiments. One of the things we'd like our paper to be consistent with is a study very recent by Golosob et al. This is a working paper that looks at the effect of winning the lottery of at least 30,000 on labor earnings. And what they find is that there's very large and immediate effects. Average annual labor earnings fall by about $2.34 for every $100 of post-tax lottery winnings. Okay? This is on a per adult level, which is the same way that we're looking at things. So that you divide by the number of adults in the household, and that happens during the first 5 years after winning the lottery. So there's a large distribution of lottery winnings. It's actually a very large sample, and these are pretty tightly estimated. There's also a literature, and we're just going to be taking a bunch of elasticity estimates from Blundell and McCurdy that look at the non-labor income elasticity of labor supply. So you get extra money that doesn't come from labor. How does that affect your labor supply? And then there's the effect on child skill formation, for which we're looking at exogenous changes in income based on changes in the earned income tax credit from Dell and Lochner. And what they found is that if you give an extra $1,000 to parents, it increases their combined reading and math scores by about 4.1% of a standard deviation, with very large kind of confidence intervals between 1 and I think it's 1 and 6 point something percent of the standard deviation.
So in terms of the lottery winnings, would you expect that to be much lower labor supply response to a one-time lottery winning compared to a policy that I know is going to be in place forever? So
Yes, I'm not asking for UBI to be consistent with that. I'm asking that when I do the experiment that I'm going to show you, which is going to be a one-time winning, that it gives you the results that Galasov gives.
Exactly.
So I'm not asking that UBI does that. I'm asking for the experiments that I'm going to now run in my model to reproduce them. Yes, precisely because it would be expected to be very different. So how do we look at these experiments in the model? We look at small scale, because these are small scale. That means that they do not affect prices and they do not affect taxes. Short run, because they're given, for a few years or it depends. And for skill formation, targeted. Not everybody gets an earned income tax credit. Okay? So we do these things. We use the lottery winnings, the earnings distributions from the paper, and we find very similar. We give them to people at the beginning of the period. You won the lottery. How much do you want to work this period? And we look at how much they want to work. And in the first period, which is 4 years for us, we find that it would decrease by $2.20, which is very close to what they got per $100. For the elasticity of labor supply, those were based on a summary of all the literature. So they have a wide range of elasticities. And some experiments had them given for many years. Some of them came from studies that only gave them to you once. So what we do is we run from we give it to them for 1 period all the way up to 5 periods, and then through their lifespan. And it yields a cross-sectional average between negative 0.02 and negative 0.08, which depends on the time span, which is, again, accords with the literature. For the child's cognitive skill, we give the parents $1,000 per year. Basically, that's what EITC on average gave parents. The changes in EITC gave parents while the kids lives with them. And what we find is that the kids' skills increase between 1.1 to 2.75% of a standard deviation for children whose parents makes less than $30,000 per year. So again, here it's targeted. Again, there's no effect on prices. There's no effect on anything else. We're just looking at these. So we think our model does a very good job of being in line with empirical results that come from very different places and from our model, and doing it in the correct way, which is not using general equilibrium and using, in the case of child transfers, targeted transfers. So now we're ready to look at the policy, and this is where I should realize how long this takes me. Okay, so the policy, we're using a UBI policy that's discussed quite a bit, which is everybody getting an annual transfer. Here we're making it $8,000. Again, that's $8,000, which you would like to think of today as being, well, today prior to inflation as, $12,000, okay? We're going to assume that you need to balance the budget in every period. So before, when we raised taxes, those were used to finance the lump sum transfers. finance Social Security. There was stuff left over. We made sure that the stuff left over, plus all of that, was equal to 19% of GDP. Okay, we're going to leave that stuff left over constant as we do these experiments, and we're going to have to change taxes. So someone asked before which taxes it was. We're going to assume that it's lambda t. Okay, one way to think about this lambda t is that it's a change in the average tax. It's not completely right, but it doesn't matter. Think of it as a change in the average tax, average labor tax. For our benchmark UBI, again, someone asked this question. We're going to have UBI being in addition to current redistribution programs. So I'm sorry, I forgot who asked. Someone said, you know, it can make you get rid of monitoring costs and get rid of targeted benefits, et cetera. So we could do that, and we have exercises where we do that instead. We can also have it get rid of progressivity, other forms of progressivity, we also do that. So this is, UBI replaces some current redistribution programs. We can set omega is equal to 0, which makes UBI basically less generous than before. We can have it reduce administrative expenditures, and we could finance it via a consumption tax rather than the labor tax parameter lambda. This is interesting because this is the only one that yields different results. And if we have time, I will explain why. Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What's the, right now in the PSID, what's the average amount of transfer?
It depends. About if you actually look at the data, it's probably about 1,800. We get it to be about 1,600.
Who stands with?
Sorry?
Who stands with?
I don't want to say yes because I actually don't know anymore. I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Yeah, sorry. So I should look and know, but I don't. Okay. We're particularly interested in thinking about the role of, you know, why is it that welfare becomes negative? You know, it's going to be negative. We want to think about incentive effects, taxation effects, and general equilibrium consequences. That's one exercise we want to do. Then we want to ask, well, how much does it matter that we had an endogenous capital market and these intergenerational linkages? And lastly, we want to contrast what we got with the literature that has found that the US has too little redistribution. And we want to ask, is it consistent with that? Or is it just the fact that $8,000 is incredibly expensive to fund for everyone? So we're going to give a very small transfer to people and ask what the consequences are. And I'll make clear what I mean by a Merlizian style analysis later on. And of course, I'm never going to get to this. We're going to look at what happens when you get out of work more frequently. And the bottom line is the consequences just become more negative. Let me go over, so now we've introduced UBI, and I wanted to show you the transition dynamics, okay, as a consequence of this introduction of UBI. Think about this as a UBI is a surprise. It's announced. From now on, we have UBI, and that's the experiment that we're running. As you can see, this occasions a very sharp fall, the blue line, in output. About half of it comes from a fall in the capital stock, which is really large, 20-something%. And the other one comes from the CES aggregate, which I don't remember showing you, the CES aggregate of capital and labor, the CES aggregate of college labor and non-college labor, which you mush together to get something called H. And that's your effective labor. And that's actually falling as well. So half of it comes from here, half of it comes from the green, from H. What about prices? Well, you can see that what happens is that the interest rate first falls dramatically because people are going to be reducing their labor supply. And then it's going to increase over time as there's less and less capital. What happens to the high school wage and college wage? It's the opposite. They first go up and then they come down. What happens to the share of tax revenue? I should make clear, all of these, which you probably can't see very well, are in percentage terms relative to the steady state of the model without UBI, okay? So when we see this big line, blue line going up, it means that we've had an increase in tax revenue coming from labor of about 80%, and a drop of a bit less than 20% in the tax revenue that comes from capital income and from consumption. The labor income tax, both the average marginal tax and the average labor tax, increased dramatically. Investment in skills, which is this yellow line, falls. Parental transfers falls. The reason you have these wiggly lines is because it depends on each time its parental skills are coming in. So parents affect children who then affect their own children, but they don't affect them until they become parents, which gives you that lag. The share of agents that go to college decreases. Labor productivity, which is a transformation
So
of...
can you go back? So what was the college implication? How much is
it goes down about 4%. That's here. It goes down about 4%. The share of college decreases by about 4%. That's what that's showing. Labor productivity falls. Those are those cognitive skills. They're falling. Hours worked falls dramatically. Well, not dramatic, I don't know, 4% and 8%. Here, it's not saying which one's college and which one's high school. I think this one's college and this one's high school, but I'm not 100% sure. I should say it. If you look at a coefficient from a regression that regresses college on parental income, or another one that regresses skill expenditure on parental income, that decreases, meaning that there's less dependence on your parents' income than before. So this is, in some sense, greater mobility than previously. Income inequality, measured by the variance of the log of after-tax income, really falls by about 50%. So huge decrease in inequality. Intergenerational mobility, the blue is a rank coefficient of Cherry's. It's with a negative sign, so the fact that it's going up means that there's more mobility rather than less mobility between parentheses intergenerational mobility, parents and child. So that is improving. And the probability of a child exiting the bottom, who's born in the bottom 20%, of exiting that bottom 20% increases. Okay, so it's doing well on these. For wealth share, wealth is spread more evenly, basically. Let's just leave it at that. So
about the college thing, so you told us about this regression. I'm wondering for kids of like poor parents, like now that they get this UBI, do they become more likely to go to college, or is this just a gradient?
Yes, I have that in the paper. That's something we added now to the paper. I don't think it changes that much, but honestly, I need to look at the paper. It becomes less dependent on parental income, so overall, yes. Overall, yes.
And the UBI might make it more affordable, but if you already have the UBI, there's an income effect that goes in the other direction also. You don't know exactly.
Right, but it's not so much that is dissuading people from going to college. What's dissuading people from going to college is the fact that they're paying more taxes.
Yeah, that's at the higher.
Yeah. So that's more, I think, what's driving it. I think I've said all these things. So this is what the welfare dynamics look like. What I've plotted here is this, on the x-axis is a cohort that you're born into. So cohort 0 means the cohort who are born, the cohort 0 is a cohort who is just born into this new world, the world with UBI. Not steady state, just born when it's introduced, okay? And obviously, cohort negative 19 means a cohort who's just one period away from death, which happens at age, I should have said, at 20, period 21 with probability 1. They have one period left to live. That's their average welfare. This is averaging the welfare over all cohorts in consumption, equivalent units. So it's all done correctly. And what else do I want to say? These are future cohorts that were born all afterwards, and we basically stopped around cohort 50. So this means you're born 50 periods. 50 times 4 is 200. So 200 years after the introduction of UBI, just so that we understand each other. So as you can see, there's an immediate negative effect for all people who were alive. These people were all alive when UBI is introduced. These are the people that we're thinking about. Some of the people that we're thinking about. These are the people who were born after UBI is introduced. This is looking at adults at t equal to 0. So by adults, I mean people who are in period 5 and above, not period 0. Period 5 and above when UBI is introduced. And this is just showing you some heterogeneity, both by age and by education. And in general, you can see a relatively clear pattern. People who are older lose less. Everybody loses. People who are older lose less. Remember, even though you're old, you care about your children and your grandchildren, etc. Okay? So it's not necessarily going to be a monotonic relationship. It's true that you're closer to death, and so it's going to affect you less, but your children are also older, and they're going to be affected quite a bit by this. Okay? So in any case, as you can see, it's bad for people of all ages, and it's also bad by people for all educations. The green is people who didn't go to college. The yellow are the people who go to college. Of course, it's worse for people who go to college.
Have you done it by income?
Well, income is endogenous.
No, I know, but income at the time of when you introduced reform. You take the,
I mean, you could.
The first one. So, I mean, there must be some.
You could. I mean, education's a pretty good.
Income individuals.
Yeah, education's a pretty good proxy. I have 15 minutes, so I'm going to go a little bit. Education's a pretty good proxy, but we can do it by income as well. We might have something in the appendix. I don't remember. But obviously, some people are better off.
Because it can't be that 100% of people.
No. Here it is. 26.5% of all adults favor the introduction of UBI.
At the time of the reform.
Yeah, if you ask these people, if you ask these people, the others can't. They're dead. I mean, they're not dead. They're not born yet. And the others are dead. So these people who are alive and who are adults, are you in favor of this reform? 26% of them would say yes. Okay. So yes, there's heterogeneity. And what I'm showing you is averages by cohort conditional on education and age. Okay, so the main thing of the paper, I guess the way I see it, is to try to understand these results and not so much to condemn UBI, but to understand what's driving it and does it make sense. Okay, so we do several exercises, and it's all going to be a question of racing against the clock. So you can stop me where you want, but I'm going to look at the contribution of PE, partial equilibrium, general equilibrium. We're going to do something pretty novel, which is to compare adjacent cohorts to understand the contribution of intergenerational linkages. We're going to replace endogenous skill formation with an exogenous transition matrix to understand the role of skill formation. We're going to replace an equilibrium market with an exogenous one to understand the role of aggregate capital stock and an endogenous interest rate. And then we're going to do the Merlezian decomposition. So let me just start here. This bottom line, didn't fit into one long slide. It's just simply showing you for all these variables here, the results that you've already seen. And it's just breaking them out by hours, capital, college, etc., income inequality, etc. Here's welfare of adults. Those are the people who are alive. That's our -6. And welfare in the steady state. Sometimes it's going to be children. I'll try to be clear. It's 22%. So that's what this is. Now, the first exercise we want to do is to introduce this UBI only for one cohort and without any tax consequences. So obviously, this is something great. Everybody's getting an extra $8,000. There's no negative consequences of this. And we just want to ask, what are the incentive effects? This is a pure incentive effect from getting extra money. And you see people work less, about 10% less, but their capital stock goes up. So like yours, you could have thought it would go down. It would go up because there's going to be precautionary savings are less. But people are richer here, so they're going to, they're going to save more. Labor productivity goes up a bit. Parental transfers go up, way up, because as a parent, this is your only time you're getting this. Your child's not getting this. You're going to give some to your child. So the same for skill investment. So everything that's happening for kids is good, and you can see adults' welfare really goes up, and so does their kids' welfare. And this is not a very interesting experiment per se, but it makes us understand incentives for one cohort. Now we do that same, only one cohort, but this time you have to pay taxes. And the question is, who pays the taxes? We're having only that cohort pay the taxes. In general, that's not true. In general, everybody pays the taxes. But this one time, since they're the only ones we're getting at, we're having them bear the full tax burden of this $8,000 for every for their cohort. Every year they're getting that. And as you can see, now the welfare consequences, both for their this is not steady state, this is for their children. Note this economy will go back to its steady state eventually because it's only one period. So only one cohort is getting, not one period, only one cohort. And as you can see, you know, the welfare of adults also falls, and hours worked really goes down. Pretty negative effects on the capital stock, on labor productivity, on transfers, and on skill investment. So if you give it to only one cohort, it's going to be a fairly negative thing. The next thing is you give it only to, I should have said one thing, we're not letting prices change. This is partial equilibrium. Now, we still have partial equilibrium. That's what this no GE means. But now not only do we have taxes, but we give everybody, all future cohorts, UBI. So this is the effects of UBI without general equilibrium effects, okay? And as you can see, what really happens a lot, what's most dramatic, is the decrease in capital. Okay, that you see. The amount of the capital stock falls by 58%, which is huge because it means that your tax revenue from capital is going to fall by that percentage. Remember, R is fixed right now because that's a general equilibrium object. So that's huge. Parents transfer far less to their kids. They make even smaller investments in their kids, and even more dramatically negative welfare consequences. And as you can see now, comparing to the fourth line, which is where we originally started out, that introduces the GE effects as well. Now you can see that GE mitigates. In other words, what happens? Well, the interest rate goes up because capital has fallen so much. So the interest rate goes up, and that's going to make people want to save more. So the interest rate, so the capital stock, instead of falling 58%, falls only 27%. Parental transfers don't go down as much. Labor productivity still goes down by quite a bit. College does not go down by as much as before, and but you still see negative effects on wages. Okay, the interest rate goes up by 16%. Okay, so that was all that. That was one exercise to try to understand what's going on. A different exercise, which I didn't put in the bullets, is just to understand steady state results. So changes in welfare in the steady state have to come from one of two things. Either you change what the welfare is of being an adult, given that you come into the world with some assets, some skills, and some taste for college, and that becomes something different because the world has changed, the policy has changed, the amount of capital has changed, everything has changed, or changes in the distributions of those states. The probability that you have these assets, these cognitive skills, and this taste for college has changed in the new steady state. So one way to look at things is how important our parents is this in some sense. When this is determined at the beginning of life in period 5, completely by your parents. You get a taste for college, that depends on your parents. You get some skills, that depends on your parents. And you come out into the world with some assets. That depends on your parents. So one way to think about it is how important are your parents? Okay? Because what's happened is that this distribution is going to be changing endogenously in the new steady state. So our decomposition is say, keep how good it is to live in this new world just as it was before, pre-UBI. But only allow the probability distribution over these states to change. When we allow the probability distribution to change over these states, we find there's a welfare loss of 10.6%. That is almost half of the total steady state welfare losses. So one way to think about it is that almost half of the total steady state welfare losses are because parents are investing less in their kids, they're transferring less, and that's leading to a different distribution. An alternative decomposition would say, no, let's keep this constant and have the value function of living in this new world reflect the new reality. And when you do that, you get 56% of the total losses. Remember, these are not going to be additive, okay? Yes. So I have 5 minutes. So I will just tell you the bottom line of this. That was another exercise. Another exercise that we do is to look at particular cohorts. Here is for the steady state, the values of skills, parents, college, labor productivity, consumption equivalence in terms of welfare. I'm asking, for the first cohort who's born, not in the new steady state, but when the policy is introduced, how do they fare? Why are they an interesting cohort? They're the first cohort whose their entire state variables is going to be determined in this new world. Not in the steady state of the new world, but in the new world, okay? And as you can see, half of the welfare losses that you're going to bear in the steady state are already borne by these kids. They're going to be losing about 13% in consumption equivalence units. The next really interesting one to look at is the cohort that was right at the beginning of their 4th period of life. It's the last period in which their parents are making investments in their skills. So their skills are almost fixed. That's what that almost fixed means. But they haven't gotten parental transfers. And as you can see, their welfare falls. But it's about 2/3 of this fall that you see for cohort 0. Another interesting cohort to compare is cohort that was 1 period older than them. And these people started life all skills fixed and their transfers when UBI is introduced. And as you can see, their welfare is going to fall by less. And the interesting thing to think about here, it's not really exact because other things are changing in the background as well, is that the difference between these two and these two tells you that about 2/3 of the losses are coming from the fact that your parents, you had to have your skills formed in the new world. And about 1/3 of the losses are coming from the fact that your asset transfers are going to be smaller. Okay. So I'm going to really do this quickly. We can examine the role of endogenous skills in capital markets by replacing endogenous skills by a transition matrix. And what this matrix does is it gives each child a draw from the original steady state distribution of skills that corresponds to their parents' education and skill level. So the dependence on parents is still there, but it's exogenous. Parents do not spend money on them, okay? It's exogenous given parents' education and skill. We do not re-estimate this model. We let this model go to its new steady state. But when it does almost as good a fit of the moments that are used in the estimation of the pre-UBI benchmark model. That's one experiment. The other experiment is we keep the aggregate capital stock and the interest rate constant at the steady state values of pre-UBI. And therefore, the capital tax revenue is unchanged. This model has to be equivalent observationally to the steady state of the pre-UBI benchmark model. Agents can borrow and save just as they did before, but they're doing so at a constant interest rate. Why does the constant capital stock matter? Because it means that their wages, while it's going to depend on their efficiency units, it's not going to depend on capital at all. Because, the way that it depends on capital is being kept fixed in the background. Okay, so when we do this, here's just a benchmark model for reference for these results. When we keep people with fixed skills, what we find is that the welfare of adults barely changes, so there's not much of a contribution, which is kind of sensible because most of them if you're adults, your skills have already been fixed. So the only way it matters to you is how it matters to your children and grandchildren, et cetera. So it's not surprising, there's almost no difference here. But there's a big implication for welfare steady state. The losses are cut to 1/2. So one way to think about this is that a model that does not include endogenous skills formation is really going to get the welfare in the steady state wrong by about 50%. Okay, so quantitatively, it's important. When we put in a fixed capital stock, now we see very different results. the welfare of adults really goes up. And the welfare losses in the steady states are cut to basically whatever, a quarter of what they used to be. And if you introduce both of them, then there's almost no losses in the steady state, and you see a slight increase in the welfare of kids. What is this telling you? Well, the capital stock is really important in the model. Not only is it a form of, allowing you to save more because it's keeping the interest rate higher, but it's also changing the productivity of labor. So what happens when the capital stock is fixed is people don't decrease their labor supply so much because taxes haven't gone up by as much because the capital stock hasn't gone down by as much. So they don't decrease their labor supply so much. Therefore, the labor tax doesn't have to change so much. And because the labor tax doesn't have to change so much, they're not so unwilling to go to college. And the parents aren't so unwilling to invest in their child's skills. So it's kind of all a virtuous cycle. Okay. The last thing I want to just tell you is, can I take 1 minute to do this? Is the Merleesian style decomposition. So just for background knowledge, very quickly, public finance literature, which I did not know before doing this, suggests that there's too little redistribution in the US. We introduce a small UBI by permanently increasing omega by $100 annually for all adults. We finance this just in the same way we did before by increasing the labor tax. And we decompose changes into a mechanical, behavioral, and partial equilibrium, and total effect in general equilibrium. Okay, so what is the mechanical? The mechanical says, okay, I'm going to give $100 to everyone. And when I do that, I'm going to allow taxes to change to fund that, but I'm not going to allow any behavioral changes. I'm not going to allow you to change your labor supply or your kids to change college decisions or anything like that. And when you do that, you find that, of course, welfare, I shouldn't say of course, welfare does go up. Yeah, welfare goes up. There's no behavioral changes. So this is just a very mechanical thing that people in the public finance literature do. The other thing is to do a short-run partial equilibrium where we give this transfer of $100 only to adults. So we only look at their welfare, but we allow partial equilibrium and we allow behavioral responses, but they're only in partial equilibrium. What we find here is something that very much accords with the public finance literature, that is this transfer makes people better off. If you give it to them just to adults, there are behavioral responses, but there's no intergenerational linkages in the sense that there's not too much going on for their kids. I mean, there's still things going on, but the kids are not also getting these $100. This makes people better off. It's only when you give the $100 to everyone that you see the negative results in the steady state, but also for the adults that are alive right now. And here, when you introduce general equilibrium concerns, actually, as opposed to before, things even get worse. So I don't really have too much time to say anything more. I'm going to skip all this. I'm just going to conclude. Let me just put it all up. From what we just finished saying, I want to tell you that the model is not in disagreement with the public finance literature that finds positive effects from more redistribution, at least for a little bit more. But it does say that those might come from looking at, models without intergenerational linkages and without GE effects. And I think it would serve as a caution for that. So I'm starting down here. What did we do? We used a general equilibrium, overlapping generations, and complete market models of these shocks with distortionary taxes, with endogenous intergenerational links to evaluate UBI. The validation exercises shows the model did a good job. The UBI generates average negative welfare consequences for every cohort, very large consequences in the long run. And I think I should stop here because you can read this for yourself. Okay.
We have time for
Okay. Okay, thank you.